and welcome to the Collective Arcana. We're a channel all about tabletop gaming. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit about victory points from the Gamemastery guide for Pathfinder 2nd edition. We had a couple people ask about this in the comments of our review for the book. We just wanted to go a little more in depth into it. And we will do so. It's going to be hard to really cover everything. These subsystems, most of the ones presented in the book, use the victory point system, or some variation of it, and there's an awful lot in there, and it all gets, really down to the exact type of thing you're tracking with it. What we will do, what I will hope to try to do, is explain, exactly how they work in concept, and give you some ideas on how you might implement them into your game. I definitely recommend, if you are interested in this, that you do pick up the Gamemastery guide. While this is made for Pathfinder 2nd edition, as I said in the review video for this book, I think this is a pretty valuable little tool no matter what game system you're playing, whether that's 5e or Pathfinder 1st edition. The various different subsystems and alternative rules even can be really nice inspiration for you for ways to tweak your game no matter what kind of game you're playing. Without any further ado, let's just jump right into it. First, what are victory points? Why would you use them? They are functionally an alternative way to track progress, generally used if you don't want to simplify some sort of progress bar is just a yes or a no, or even the 4 points of the 4 degrees of success from just a d20 roll. So maybe for whatever reason you're running an intrigue campaign and you don't want it to be as simple as just rolling one diplomacy check to get access to the fancy party. You want it to be something that your players have to work to over the period of either a game session or maybe even several game sessions. Maybe you might even be tracking some of these systems throughout an entire campaign. It really just depends on what you're using the victory points for, and we'll get into that a little bit as well. So anytime you're thinking about using the victory points, you want to ask a few questions to yourself, and these are just the general ones, and we will get into some of the subsystems that use the victory points as well. First thing you're going to want to do is decide if it is something that will be just going through a single part of an adventure, the entire session, or something that will be more long-term than that. You're going to decide how are the points handled. That is, are your players or the characters, are they gaining points? Are they losing points? Are they trying to stop someone else from gaining points? Do you have a whole lot of various things within that where maybe the players can gain or lose points? Other parties can gain and lose points. And then maybe even the party is trying to gain, in the case of like reputation, they're trying to gain favor with multiple different organizations. And this book, even when it goes into the reputation tracking system, it even talks about how certain organizations may not like you moonlighting with others. And so once you reach certain echelons within those organizations, progressing further in others will either be impossible or may just cause you to lose face with, the first organization you were working on. That's really fun, and it's something that could definitely come up quite a bit. Now, you may be asking yourself, why bother with this? This is things that I've been doing in my game for years. Yeah, most people have done, if not exactly these sort of scenarios, things very similar. And you could absolutely run those as you've been running them, just keeping very detailed notes and very specific information, either, in a notebook or in your head, or, maybe even relying on both yourself and all of your players to try to keep it all together. What these victory points are for is if you are either not terribly concerned with most of the specifics, if, for example, a lot of these NPCs they may meet are just stepping stones to get them where they really need to go, and once they're done with them, they're not useful anymore. All sorts of scenarios where instead of keeping track of specifics, you just want a general, easy to digest, quick reference tool of, okay, right now this organization likes you. Yes, maybe specifically within that organization, there are individuals who have their own attitude, and absolutely you should do that even if you're using this reputation system. But this allows you to also keep track of sort of an overarching idea within an organization or within a town, or we'll see some of the other subsystems. Something else to consider is, are you going for just a single goal, like a single target number of these victory points that your players need to accumulate, or are you trying to determine various thresholds or milestones of success where maybe if you're trying to do certain things, this threshold might be okay, but if your players do a really good job earning these points, maybe they can even have unexpected rewards and get a foot in the door with people or organizations that they hadn't even anticipated. Some other things to consider is what you're tracking. Do you want your players to be aware of it? Is it something that they should be aware of or be able to measure themselves? Is their progress something that they're going to be able to keep track of and immediately see? And beyond just your players, is it something that their characters will be able to track and see? Or is it something even more abstract where, they might have to just rely on, occasional hints from you how they're doing in terms of meeting those goals? It can be a very different game if the number or the points that they're trying to acquire are right in front of them, as well as, some benchmark goals that they're working towards, versus if, they just sort of have to keep doing their best and hoping that it's working. Both certainly have a lot of value given different situations, but you may find that depending on what you're trying to do with your victory points, one or the other of those may be just more appropriate to that circumstance. Finally, you're going to want to determine what stands against your players and their characters. Is it just an environmental thing where, is it, maybe a volcano's exploding, or, maybe the city's on fire, or, just a building? Are your players working against something that is just, whether it's a moving target or a solid target, something that is just happening on its own terms, and then the players are just trying to keep up with it or, get ahead of it? Or is it something where there are active agents, or whether that's individuals, organizations, or other types of entities that are actively working against your players? In which case, then you decide, am I tracking points for these other individuals? Am I tracking points just for the players? Am I setting points just for the individuals and the players have to worry about that? Do both have their own set of points? And again, that's something that you'll get some guidance for within the book, but it is something you should think about depending on what you're trying to do with the system. And then the other big question is, what is the scale? Even if it's something that is, taking place over many sessions, if the ramifications of what you're tracking aren't that severe, you probably don't need to worry about having, huge numbers of points. Whereas if you're trying to gain reputation throughout, a massive city over the course of, the first half of a campaign or, whatever you're doing, you may require hundreds of points to get to the best possible result with hopefully, some milestones along the way if the party, botches some tasks or, infuriates the wrong NPCs. But if it's something as simple as, you're working through a cave network that, yes, may take several weeks to get through, several game sessions to get through if it's a big super dungeon, but within there's only a few opportunities to deal with whatever this victory point system is, whether it's acquiring certain resources within that dungeon to operate some machine that they know is going to be at the end, sort of like a Zelda type situation, or whether it's maybe there's different clans of residents, intelligent humanoids within that cave system or dungeon, and maybe some of them might be able to be reasoned with. And so by having a few seemingly random encounters with, a few different tribes or organizations, maybe you could, maybe the party could befriend them and get some aid later in the dungeon, or just have, maybe this dungeon is like a shortcut through a mountain pass that they're trying to take, and by allying themselves with these figures instead of having this fully antagonistic, we're coming through, we're shooting everybody as we go through. Maybe you could have a relationship with those, kobolds, say, and I think is one of the examples they use in the book. And maybe you could create, an actual possible, going forward, a way through that mountain instead of just using it as a one-time get-through. So if that's all you're trying to do with just a small group like that, just a few positive points could be all that it takes, as opposed to, tracking in a full intrigue game, tracking, dozens, maybe even, hundreds of points that you're trying to track. Something else that you may track with it, and it's not really something that's directly mentioned here, but you may track like corruption through a city, whether that is disease or, maybe some popular drug, maybe it's some sort of, anarchist ideal or, rebellion that's moving through a city. It could even be, an organization that's spreading, or it could be something like magical influence of some creature or organization trying to, take over the city. So that's something you might track with victory points, sort of like, something that the party can, once they're aware of, they can sort of map out and see, how big the problem is, try to figure out ways to keep the problem from getting bigger and then eventually diminish the problem. That's something great that these victory points can be used for. So what you got is some great examples of the questions you should be asking about using the victory points. So, what are the victory points? The good thing is about it is that they're very amorphous. They can be whatever you need them to be. You could be working in terms of, one positive interaction nets the party 1 point in their pool, or, stopping, this, loses 1 pool for an opposing pool that they're working on. It can be something very easy to see, very, obvious, like there's 100 people in this building, and, you need to try to get as many of them out as you can because, the fire is spreading. And then you've got an easy threshold, you've got 100 people, and it's pretty easy to track how well you're doing based on how many people the party is able to get out of that building. But it can be something much more amorphous, like, how do you track, what's appropriate level ranges for reputation? So again, it could be, it's going to depend on how in-depth you want it to be. Like I said, if it's something that you don't intend to be an overarching thing through your campaign, probably just a few points is all you're going to need. The party's just going to need to find some way to accumulate 5 points of positivity on that reputation scale in order to be able to get to, this dinner party. But trying to get audience with the king might be quite a bit harder. So it really just comes down to what you want, what you think an appropriate number the goal is, and then you need to go in and find out. And for some of the systems, this will give you a lot of great examples. But if you're doing something sort of on your own, creating something not specific to the examples here, you may find yourself, having to ask questions like, well, how do they gain them? How do they lose them? If this happens, is this worth more points than this sort of thing? Whether that's positive or negative. This generally goes with the sort of scaling that you would expect. Critical success might get you 2 points. Regular success gets you 1. Failure gets you none. And then a critical failure gets you -2. It's really going to be specific to what you're trying to do within the game. So let's talk about the systems that are in the book. And keep in mind there are several more subsystems in this Game Mastery Guide, not just these victory point-based ones. But, this is kind of what we're talking about is the victory point, so I'm not going to cover the ones that don't explicitly use it. So the first one we've talked a lot about, and that's reputation. That is trying to gain favor with large organizations, maybe even an entire city. Basically going from, we're nobody rat, we kill giant rats, to being, heroes of the day, where you got respect of nobility. You can go into any district without being hassled, that sort of thing. The smaller version of that is influence, and that's your direct ability to gain favor or even manipulate an individual. So, maybe you just need to, maybe you're, in a smaller town and you just need to convince, the mayor that he needs to take this, outside threat more seriously than he is. And, maybe he's an idiot. Maybe he, just isn't superstitious enough to believe that, that Lich is bringing his army, whatever it is. And you go in and it's just, instead of a single social check, it's this larger, like, subsystem mini game almost, where you're, trying to make points and arguments, and in that way you have a threshold of once you've succeeded and gotten this many points, now this guy is more inclined to listen to you. Sure, different NPCs are going to have their own dispositions. Maybe even if he does believe you, he doesn't want to do anything about it, but, that's what the game is. And, you can use this maybe if you are trying to convince someone to let you come to a secret meeting, all sorts of things like that. Influence is something that if you have a group of very social players who really like that intrigue aspect, and you want those social encounters, those sort of tete-a-tete moments, where you're trying to just persuade or whatever, if you want that to be a little bit bigger, feel as impactful and as high stakes as, a combat that might take 20 minutes to an hour, depending on the size of it, you can really go in and you can focus in on those sort of social encounters, which, again, for a lot of tables, that's going to be a really fun thing, and they're going to really like it. Some people may not. Some people may prefer, to just keep dice rolls out of some social situations. Again, your table is your table. Always do what feels right for you guys. But if your group really likes those social interactions, and you or they just feel like having something a little more concrete, a little more gamified, so that you can better track your progress and, know better about, what you're trying to do, then this could be a great system for you. One of the other victory point systems in here is research. And much like the influence and even the reputation, it's something that you may not feel that you need. You may be comfortable in a lot of situations just allowing, one player or even two to go to the library, roll, a lore check or an arcana check, whatever it may be, and then either succeed or fail and move on with the campaign. But if it's something where you are trying to, whether it's something that's really well hidden and you want to make it feel, just all that much more impactful when they succeed or fail on getting that information. Again, if you're trying to build the same type of drama that you do in a combat where, there's all this that goes into it and it builds and hopefully to an exciting conclusion, as opposed to just, we encounter some orcs, Bill, roll an attack, you succeeded, the orcs are all dead. Some people, as much fun as you might get out of that combat, some people want to explore and go in depth in some of the other systems of the game. So for that, you might find this being worthwhile. You might also find this research subsystem being worthwhile if it's just an overarching mystery, whether that is a player's personal backstory. Maybe he or she are trying to, figure out what happened to a family heirloom, or, some, aunt who disappeared, whatever it may be, this personal sort of story. And then, so in that character's downtime, and that player can, in addition to all the other downtime activities, maybe that person says, okay, I'm going to go see if this new town that we're in has any reference to that war that my Aunt Gertrude went off to fight, when she disappeared. And then maybe they roll. And that way, you may not have to come up with specific information, that you get from that town. But that way that player can feel like they are making progress towards that little side mystery. And then you can just have thresholds and, okay, yeah, you gained 2 points, 3 more points of research on the subject. And, then I'll give you some real new information. And that way you can have that progress bar and be able to reward a player who's focusing on that backstory without necessarily having that next bit already ready, and without necessarily, bogging down the game session by giving them an info dump on something that, is important to that character, but maybe isn't necessarily something that you want to, spend 5-10 minutes on telling them all the information they gained. You can just say, yes, you've reached the next threshold. I'll get you information later, whatever it may be. But again, that way you can sort of slow drip feed in that information instead of just giving it to that character. Oh, you finally made it to this library. It has the information you need. Here's everything you found out about Aunt Gertrude. Instead, you can, give them piece by piece about what happened to, whatever that backstory element may be. You also might find it important for a big group relevant thing. Like, for example, maybe you're trying to find the location of some holy relic that's going to be used to, stop big bad evil monster thing from doing big bad evil monster plan. And it's something that you don't want them to just get from a single roll. Instead, you want to have them move around, going different places, because, they know that once they've exhausted one place, they can't get any more points at that place. So we've got to go to the next stop on the journey and hopefully get some more information there. And then, whether you are giving that information by just going to a library and rolling those, gather information or recall knowledge checks, or if you're going into town and talking to people, or, maybe, speaking to various spirits through various rituals, things like that, whatever may be relevant to your game, these are ways for you to build that instead of it, again, just being a binary, you succeeded in gaining the information or you failed. This way you can, again, drip feed it in and build drama over time with it. The last one that we're going to talk about here, the last one that is in the book focusing primarily just on those victory points, is infiltration. Infiltration, I sort of talked about it again in the review of the book. You may have noticed I got pretty excited about it. It's a very cool concept, and it's a great thing that, while not necessarily groundbreaking in concept, everybody's had to run infiltration, everybody's found a way to run infiltration. I really like how simple it is, and there's a lot of great ideas, not just mechanically to run it, but also, in terms of getting the PCs doing their preparations for a heist or an infiltration. And you can use these rules whether you are trying to break in somewhere and steal the MacGuffin item from some cult in their guarded temple, whether you are trying to rescue an important NPC that's been captured, whether you are trying to sabotage some sort of enemy plan, whether that's, a machine or whatever it may be. Maybe you're just trying to plant some sort of listening device, or otherwise just listen in on a conversation. Or maybe you're trying to assassinate a high-value target. Either way, your players do not want to go through all the trouble of clearing out this entire temple. Maybe you as the DM, you've made it clear that that's something that may not be even feasible. Maybe there's hundreds of people in here, and there's no chance that they could really, come out on top. Maybe it's a situation where there's just a couple of powerful enemies that it would be better for everyone if you didn't fight them right now, but you still need to get, whatever scenario resolved, because, they can't have the MacGuffin. They can't have the MacGuffin, all right? We've got to get that MacGuffin. So whatever that may be, you don't want to have a full-scale pitched battle with all these enemy forces. So you're going to have your players do research. You're going to have them, find out what are entry points into the location. What, is there a guard schedule? Do we know if there's any, events that may cause security to be more relaxed or, more on guard? And then you're going to want to actually have them figure out, the game plan of how are we entering. Once inside, various things that they do are going to do. With infiltration, you're tracking a couple of things. One, you're tracking the alertedness of the security, whatever that may be within the place, and you are tracking the progress towards the goal. So rather than have necessarily an entire building mapped out with anything and everything they may encounter with these sort of linear progression type of things, maybe it's just once you've reached a certain number of infiltration points, then you're at the final room, and then that way everybody can come in from different rooms, and you don't have to worry about making sure that layout of that building makes sense. You can just make sure that is interesting. And then you might have you'll have that other tracker for the alertedness level of the defenders, and maybe there's ways to lower that alertedness. Maybe there's ways to reset it even. But, it's just various things that you may consider when running an infiltration. And it's just a really fun concept for a way to have a lot of skill-based challenges for your players, a lot of things where your rogues and your other characters that have a lot focused on outside of combat, your utility casters and stuff like that, can really shine. And with the way that Pathfinder 2nd Edition really allows plenty of room for all players to pretty much have to have good skills and some skill feats. Don't be afraid. It's not like 3.5 D&D where your fighter or your barbarian may only have a couple of skills they're good with and their intimidation. You're going to have much more well-rounded characters. So even the rogues, of course, and things like that are really going to shine. But everyone's going to be able to get involved, just like combat. Certain people may be better geared towards it, but everyone's going to be able to contribute, and that's going to be the case here as well. But it allows those characters and those players who maybe don't love the combat as much as others to have a really interesting, really fun sort of encounter where they get to feel as heroic as the barbarian who's dealing, 40 damage around or whatever it is. They get to come in and they get to show off some of their abilities and some of the things they've invested in. And it's nice. It's nice for variety. It's nice, to not have things just be resolved with a simple, not binary anymore, but a simple, single D20 roll. All these are going to allow you to run very different types of situations, all with a very simplified underlying mechanic that once you've got laid out how they earn points, how they lose points, and what those goals are, you can apply to all sorts of various sorts of ideas. One thing that when I was preparing for the video that I just sort of thought of is, maybe you and your players hate keeping track of loot and gold. I know that's a rare thing, but maybe it's something that you're not so much concerned with, or maybe you're running a scenario where there's not necessarily, you don't want to get into the nitty-gritty, how many coins do I have? You could run, much like a reputation, you could run a resources or wealth with these victory points, so that, as your players gain in wealth, certain things for them don't cost anything. Functionally, like if you're a very wealthy person, buying a new +1 sword may not be something that you need to keep track of or consider. You'd still have to keep track of, bigger purchases, and they may lower your overall wealth if you make too many of them in a certain amount of time. Just things to think about, fun things that you could do. I'm sure that we're going to see some of this expanded upon going forward. There's, like I said, with the tracking disease or, corruption through a city, and then possibly using it as wealth. Like, those are just a couple of ideas I've already had. And I'm sure the people over at Paizo are coming up with a lot more. If you've got some other ideas for how you might use these victory points, definitely put them in the comments down below. I'm sure I will be excited to see any other ideas for them. I'm sure a lot of other people will be as well. If you have any questions, I don't want to, again, I didn't want to go fully in depth and just read this book to you. First of all, there's no need. You can get a lot of these specific rules on Archives of Nethys. Also, you really should, if these sound interesting to you at all, again, even if you're not playing Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you really should look into getting this book. It is really good, and I know that, as of filming this, we're still going through a bit of a health crisis here in our country, in the United States where we live. And so Paizo, one thing they're doing is they're doing pretty frequent, I don't know as of right now if there's one going on, but they're doing pretty frequent PDF sales. So you may be able to get some of these books digitally for, relatively relatively little expense. I definitely prefer hardcover physical books myself. But if you're just trying to get some information, and if you're, it's the digital age now. I'm an old man. Not everybody likes these books. So by all means, look through and see if this is on sale or any other books. There's a lot of great content in here, and we really do. It's been one of my favorite books for 2nd edition so far. So that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, we'll do our best to answer them. And this has been the Victory Points subsystem within the Gamemastery Guide for Pathfinder 2nd edition. Thanks so much for watching, and welcome to the Collective.